Yeah.
Great, thank you. Just to pick up on the excellent questions already, with that last, whether it's ESU or whether it's NTNDP, you were talking about investment opportunities that were specified by AEMO in either one of those documents. Does that include a consideration of proposals in either the CEFC or ARENA pipelines?
I don't know. I'll have to take that on.
Because we weren't able
notice.
to bring AEMO before us, unfortunately, these estimates, although I think we're going to try to rectify that for next time. So if you could take that on notice.
I'll take that on notice.
That'd be great.
And just in relation to bringing AEMO, the tricky thing with AEMO, as the committee's probably been made aware, is that it's a company set up. The Commonwealth is one of the owners.
And the states are the
But there's
others.
another state.
Yeah.
Oh, but industry also. So it's actually industry owned
It's a
and government owned. So I mean, I'm sure if they were asked to come along and speak to a committee, they'd love to to get clear about what they do. Just a question of whether and I know this is a matter for the committee, whether the estimates
committee
committee
does have it in hand. So,
estimates a bit different. So there's no public expenditure to examine. So, I mean, I hope they're listening, and I'm sure they'd love to come to some sort of committee to have a discussion.
So, sorry, Senator, it is worth noting that AEMO is it's a way to organise planning for the sector. The role of CEFC and ARENA really is on financing.
Yes, I understand.
And
that.
so it's quite a different. It's not a. Now, those things in a market would all come together in some form.
But in a document identifying investment opportunities, I was hoping that the ESU or NT blah blah would turn their mind to the investment opportunities that were becoming available as a result of ARENA and CEFC's work, just for a complete picture.
Yeah, I suspect, Senator, it goes in reverse. The people who they would see an investment opportunity via the NDNTP, and then they would say, okay, here's an investment opportunity. How do I finance that opportunity?
Okay, so you think they're even at the earliest stage?
I would suspect. I would suspect that's the order. But
okay.
If I can maybe
I'll look forward to some more detail
just to
on
assist
that.
with that, Senator. Bransford Phil, Acting First Assistant Secretary of the Energy Division. Where there is committed projects, they are nominated within the ESU. So regardless of if it's financed through the CFC or through just industry participation, where it's a committed development program, it will be within the ESU, so the market can see what the forecast kind of looks like for energy production to come on.
And whether there's any spare capacity in the NEM before
and what the
any
opportunity
projects.
is. That's right.
Yeah, okay. Coming back to yet more of the excellent questions that Senator Chisholm asked, just to follow up, you mentioned in relation to a coal-fired power station that there were timelines on anticipated closure. Which power stations do those timelines apply to?
I think all plant would have a sense of the life of the plant.
So these are not government-imposed closure
No.
I was getting very excited for a moment there. This is just the lifespan of the plant.
That's right. Sorry if I gave any impression that there was any government involvement in that. I withdraw and expunge that unreservedly.
There is none, Senator.
The generation's been, still, I think Queensland State Government owns some generation, but largely
it subsidises them heavily.
Largely it's privatised. Okay,
thank you. Can I ask now about the 2017 review, but firstly the aspect of the NEO in that review. We've obviously got a bill before the House to amend the NEO in the manner described earlier. Will that bill and that issue be considered as part of the 2017 review?
The 27. We'll take that one on notice a bit, Senator. But I think the 2017 review looks at the energy or climate emissions reduction policies across the different sectors as a whole. If the NEO is an issue that is raised in that context, then that might be the right place for that to come through. The NEO really is, as Mr Heffron said, it's a matter for Energy Council. And the government has a position on the NEO, which is that the NEO stands as it is at this stage. So it's not proposing to change the objective. That really is a matter for council.
Labor didn't change it in 6 years.
Well,
so I'm surprised they're asking the questions now.
Tomorrow is another day.
That's what Scarlett O'Hara said.
Yeah. Indeed, very, very well picked up.
So it's really a matter for the Energy Council, Senator, and how that feeds into the 2017 review.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the parameters of that 2017 review, I'm interested what are they, but I'm also interested in sets that?
Well, it's the government sets that, it's the government's review. If you're happy to come back to this in 2.1, Senator, when we go back to the emissions reduction policies. So that's on next, it's on...
Yes. I actually have other more specific questions in that section. I thought these ones belonged better.
Well, the 17 review is around
portion.
climate policy and emissions reduction, which is really 2.1. This is the energy sector discussion. But in short, Senator, to answer your question, the government determines that review. It's the government's review of policies to see whether how the framework will implement the 2030 commitment.
Okay. Now, Mr Heffron, just on this point before we leave it, although I take your advice, Mr Heffron mentioned that the review would include the 2020 and 2030
No,
targets.
it's 2030.
Okay, because that was very interesting to me that you mentioned 2020. Was that a...
Yeah, sorry, my
Did you mean
apologies.
to say that?
Slip of the tongue, which is why I shouldn't wander into areas that aren't under the outcome 5.
I see. So I'll strike out that
It's
review
2030,
will
Senator.
consider the 2020 targets. Again, we live in hope. Okay, thank you. Just a few additional questions. This is obviously the first time that your section's come into this department, so we're still working out how, your purview and how you interact with environment. So can you tell me in the general what are the key bodies of work that you're working on at the moment and what's in your work plan in the next, say, 12, 18 months?
Certainly. Well, so there are 2 divisions, the Energy Division and the Energy Security Office. And Mr Philp is the acting head of the Energy Division and Ms Saul is the head of the Energy Security Office. Within the Energy Division, the main pieces of work are those that are... a program of work is largely set by the Energy Council, and so I guess there's a lot of detail on the public record, and I wouldn't waste the committee's time going through all of it, but the COAG Energy Council meeting communique from the meeting on the 19th of August articulates a range of issues that we are working on to go back to the council, some for decision in December and some for ongoing work. If I can maybe bundle those up, there's a package of work around the gas market, dealing with working off both a report that's commissioned from the ACCC, the competition regulator, and from AEMC, the Australian Energy Market Commission, looking at a more functional gas market, a better gas market, particularly on the in the NEM, the National Energy Market.
Are you looking at exports there too?
No, that doesn't really cover gas exports.
No, that's because we're exporting most of it.
Certainly, it's a big part of the
So you're not-
economy,
okay,
exportation.
just
Now, this
looking
is
at
dealing
domestic.
with better information for trading the market, and in doing that, creating trading hubs in the north around Wallumbilla and the south of Victoria, better pricing information, and the very difficult issue, the vexed issue of encouraging more gas supply. And important looking at the test of the anti-competitive test, or the test to determine whether there's anti-competitive behaviour in the monopoly-owned gas pipelines. And to lead that, Dr Michael Vertigan's been asked to put a team together and work that through and come through the December meeting. So that's an important set of issues.
Okay, thank you.
There's another one around the at the moment when prices are determined for the transmission costs. So the Australian Energy Regulator, because the electricity transmission, I think of the grid, it's a monopoly. They were state-owned. States have privatised large parts. Some states have privatised all of it. And so the regulator then has to step in and say, well, okay, what can you recover from your customers? What's a sort of a competitive price for you to recover from your customers? When that's done, the networks have what's called a limited merits review. So they can take the decision of the regulator and review it to the competition tribunal. A very vexed issue about whether there should be merits review. Ministers were quite clear in saying, well, actually, when that occurs, it always seems the case that the prices go up. And of course, those prices immediately flow onto consumers. So
and then they blame the carbon price or renewables for that inflation.
There's a substantial body of work being undertaken about the current system doesn't seem to be meeting the desired policy objectives, and it was changed in 2013 to try and get a better fit. The open question is, well, what further change should be done? So we're going through a consultation process at the moment, and there's a lot of commentary around that in the press. The range of issues around energy market transformation, noting the significant change in electricity market to the take-up of renewable generation,
Yes.
emerging new technologies, particularly battery storage. And so there's a range of work to do around regulatory frameworks for standalone systems where people or communities want to go off the grid, what sort of consumer protection should apply in those circumstances. There's a substantial piece of work around looking at the investment test that people need to satisfy themselves of, that they've done a sufficient cost-benefit analysis when they want new investment. And the sharp bit is for interconnectors. So there's a lot of debate about a third interconnector out of South Australia. At the moment there are two.
Yes.
People are talking about a third. And then the second interconnector to Tasmania. And so the issue there is the acronym is RIT-T, Regulation Investment Test for Transmission. Is that appropriately couched for the changing market? So there's a project underway there. And there are a range of other issues. And then, I guess importantly, out of the last COAG, the emergency meeting on the 7th of October, the substantial piece of work out of that is the review, the independent review to develop the National Electricity Market Blueprint.
Yes.
That we mentioned before, that's going to be
Finkel
undertaken
review, yep.
by Dr. Finkel.
Yep.
So we've got a team in the department to assist that. And then for the Brenda, are there other things that you wanted to add?
The only other piece would be the piece of work with regard to the AMC and AEMO coming together to review network security and stability, and also a review of the climate change policies around the states and territories and their effect upon the market.
Could you just say that a bit more loudly?
Sure.
Especially the second part?
Two other pieces of work, and one is with regard to the AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, and the Australian Energy Market Commission coming together to do a review of the security settings around the market. And the other is a review of the climate change policies as they affect the energy market as they apply in the states and territories.
Climate change policies of the states and territories? Correct. Okay. Could you provide me on notice some more information about that climate policy review, please?
Certainly.
Thank you.
And in relation to the Energy Security Office, one of the key issues there is the issue about the International Energy Agency, the IEA. We're a member, and we have an obligation under that to have at least 90 days worth of oil for use in Australia, and this was set back. The agreement was set back in struck in the 70s, presumably out of concerns of oil security. Australia's fallen a little short of that. Now we're in the process of working through how we get back to compliance, and Ms Sewell's area is doing the lead on that work, and for other issues in there. So I just might turn to Ms Sewell to add in.
Thanks, Rob. Margaret Sewell, Head of the Energy Security Office. The office was officially launched on the 1st of July this year, primarily to support Australia's return to compliance with IEA oil stockholding obligations, as Rob mentioned. The other main issue we lead on is Australia's domestic energy security, so that's across electricity, gas and liquid fuels, and we're increasingly starting a body of work this year that looks at regional energy security and Australia's role as a major supplier of energy resources to the Asia-Pacific area.
Okay, thank you.
And so I've left the best till last. There's a substantial piece of work being undertaken to work through the cost benefit and appropriateness of a second interconnector to Tasmania. I mentioned in passing.
You mentioned that before.
But that's obviously being an ex-Tasmanian, that's a critical issue.
Of great importance to Tasmanians. Yes, I understand. Thank you.
And it's in safe hands.
Okay, great. I'm conscious of the time. Just one quick follow-up question and then one subsequent question if there's time, Chair. Thank you, great. Just in relation to the 90-day oil requirement, does that need to be fossil fuel based or could it be biofuels?
Senator, it could include biofuels.
And
so
is that something your office is looking at?
Yes, Senator, in the context of ensuring that we have full transparency of biofuels production in Australia, yes.
Okay, could you provide me some more detail or notice about the scope of how you're looking at meeting the 90 days and what proportion of that might be from biofuels?
Senator, I can tell you at the moment that biofuels comprise about 2% of our transport fuel in Australia. And basically the work of the office is not looking at anything to support or further expand the biofuels or ethanol sector in Australia. So we are at the other end of it in terms of ensuring we understand how much biofuel is produced. But we are not the area that would be looking at any support mechanisms.
Right, even though that's an energy security issue about fuel supply.
It's an energy security issue insofar as domestic production means we don't need to import.
Yes.
But we do import already quite large quantities of biodiesel, for example. So there's a trade-off between biofuels that might be produced in Australia, existing imports, and how they would replace petroleum
and imports
products.
don't count for our 90-day target. Yeah, okay. Well, perhaps can you just, clearly it's a new area for me, so I'd like to learn a bit more. Anything you think would be useful, send it
certainly.
through. Thank you. And my final question, Mr Heverin, does your section have responsibility or oversight over ARENA or CEFC or CEIF?
CEIF, no.
It's the new Prime Minister's pet fund that was announced but then got mostly cut under, it's a joint CEFC and ARENA program.
So CEFC and ARENA still remain under the Deputy Secretary, they're independent bodies, but our engagement in the department is done through the Climate Change and Renewables Group.
Okay. So not
and
through
Joe
energy.
Evans is the Deputy Secretary of that.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much for your time.
And I have a couple of questions as well. It probably relates back to what Mr Phillip was mentioning earlier in terms of the impact of the climate change policies of the states, I suspect. But I've read in the media that the department has either done or commissioned modelling on the renewable energy targets of some of the states and also, I think, the alternatives at the national level. Is that correct? And could you take me through that?
Yes, Chair. So we were asked to do some estimates of the costs, and I asked Mr Archer's area did that, and he can talk you through that.
Brad Archer, Acting Deputy Secretary, Climate Change and Renewables Innovation. So we have done some analysis of the costs of achieving the state and territory renewable energy targets. Now we're mindful that excluding the Australian Capital Territory, those are still policies under development, and so we don't have the settled details of the policy instruments or mechanisms that those governments will be using to achieve those targets. But to arrive at an estimate of the costs, of what might be the cost of achieving those targets, I guess you need an idea of how much additional renewable energy generation will be needed to meet those targets above some baseline level, and you need some estimate of the cost of building those additional renewable power stations to generate that electricity, that renewable energy. So I guess the key input for us, as it happens, is the Australian Energy Market Operator's National Transmission Network Development Plan, which we've heard a little bit about already this morning. As I think Mr Heffernan indicated, that provides a 20-year view of the national electricity market, and I guess in this case for us, importantly, of what the generation mix might be over time. So then from that we have AEMO's forecast growth in both large and small scale renewables, and we use that to determine what would be left for the state and territory policies to deliver to achieve the targets that they've announced.
So in summarise that, after the impact of the federal renewable energy processes, what would then be needed for the states to do over and above that?
That's right. So the Australian Energy Market Operator takes into account, what existing policies are in place, or at least in this case in their 2015 report. So the Commonwealth Renewable Energy Target is factored into that.
So this is what the modelling is. What would be needed in addition to that?
That's right.
Okay.
That's
Go
right.
on, please.
So we do that for each, or in this case, we did that for each state and territory where there is a specific renewable energy target announced or committed to. And then we apply an estimate of the cost of building the renewable power stations that's needed to meet those targets, after allowing for the fact that there'll be some small-scale renewables that is likely to be invested in the ordinary course of events.
And what have you found?
We arrived at a figure of $41 billion for the additional capital cost that would be required to develop those renewable power stations to meet those state and territory
That's
targets.
across the nation.
Well, in this case, our analysis showed that there were only 2 jurisdictions where you would need additional renewables to be built to meet those targets. So in some other jurisdictions, those projections that AEMO has developed show that those targets will be met without any further policy action from the states and territories. So where it was clear that you would need additional renewable generation capacity built was in Victoria and in Queensland.
Okay, is there a split up of the $41 billion between Queensland and Victoria?
That's right.
Can you?
Oh, I don't. I might have to take that one on notice.
So just to clarify, the like other states apart from Victoria and Tasmania, Victoria and Queensland. Sorry, yeah, Tasmania. Yeah, Victoria and Queensland. The other states, their renewable energy targets would be met under existing policy of the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth's renewable energy target and the policies that are already in place. But additional work would be required in Victoria and Queensland. And your estimates, you use the word estimates, not modelling, is that correct?
Estimates, yes.
Your estimates is that would require an extra $41 billion.
That's right. I would point out that not all states and territories have renewable energy targets.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
I think
but for those who do, yeah. Okay. And have you done any work looking at alternative approaches at a national level as well?
I think that really goes to the question that the Secretary referred to earlier, that through the 2017 review is when we'll really be looking at the question of alternative policies, including to the extent that they might apply.
I thought
in
in those media articles, I thought I saw something that was done by Bloomfield or...
Bloomberg.
Bloomberg, sorry, that's it. Yes, Bloomberg.
Right. So Bloomberg New Energy Finance
yes.
is a company which does analysis of developments in energy and in renewables. So the one report that I am aware of there is a report that they did that looked at the cost of achieving 50% renewables across Australia. And that was a figure of $48 billion, which again I think relates to the capital cost for constructing the large-scale renewable power stations that would be needed.
When you see an article or a report on like that, is that something that you would go and look at to see, check the veracity of it and see the methodology and how they've arrived at that?
Well, we certainly do our best to understand the different analyses that the major analysts issue. We don't have our own internal modelling capacity to assess in fine detail every number that's sort of reported on. We do engage consultants to do modelling for us for a range of different purposes, and generally we'll have something that's been done reasonably recently that we can draw on to help us understand those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, so we'll come back with those numbers you asked
if
for
you could, the split up.
this morning, because we've got them.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
I just have some more questions.
Any more questions on energy?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it will come at a cost later on because we do have a hard cut-off date, but time. But that's fine.
Thanks. Just following on from Senator Bushby's questions there, have you estimated how many jobs that investment in renewable energy would generate?
No, I haven't. Or we haven't.
So I think the sort of work we would be doing, that would be something you really go to Treasury for, to look at the broader economic implications of different policies. This analysis is really just around the sector and sort of figuring around that, Senator.
Yeah, so obviously though, if we're talking such enormous investment, then obviously there'd be a lot of jobs that would flow from that. Would that be a fair statement?
Well, certainly there'd be a level of employment that would be associated with the development of those projects.
And also earlier we spoke about the retirement of coal-fired power stations due to meeting end of life. There would be a replacement cost with those in terms of what substitutes that in the energy market.
Well, I think that's right, Senator, although it does depend on the overall state of supply and demand in the market. So we have seen some retirements, for example, of coal-fired generation over the last few years, and in a period where we've had arguably some excess supply in the market. So the extent to which we need replacement investment in new generation at any given point in time when a power station closes really does depend on that supply-demand balance. And again, that goes back to the work that the Australian Energy Market Operator does when it does its planning and its statement of opportunities. It takes a long-term view of, based on what we understand about the expected life of power plants, what will be the required replacement generation and along what sort of time frame.
Did you put a cost on that to compare it to the 41 billion?
No.
So we can't really compare whether the 41 billion is in fact cheaper than maintaining the old fossil fuel network?
So I don't have figures on that with me at the moment. I think that, again, as we do further analysis about, for the 2017 review, about the policies that might apply in the sector, we'll develop a better understanding of that.
But, sorry, one final question, thank you, Chair. So is it not possible for that $41 billion figure to be used, sadly as the Minister has been using it, to say that renewables are somehow a more expensive option if you haven't done that work to compare, well, what would the normal maintenance cost have been anyway?
Well, there's a range of factors that you'd have to take into account. Certainly, there's a question around to what extent would that investment in maintaining those coal power stations take place in any case, i.e. what's the rate at which they're exiting the market as renewables come into the market. So some of that may happen, some of it may no longer be required if those power stations close sooner than otherwise. There's also a question around the policy mix that's applying in the sector and how that affects the generation mix. And certainly we can achieve emissions reductions in the sector, not exclusively through renewables, but through other technologies, including through gas-fired power stations. So again, you have to have, and at best we can come up with different scenarios about how the generation mix might change over time and what the impacts are for cost.
Thank you. And the Minister knows that he can't just use that $41 billion figure without those qualifications you've mentioned?
I don't think that's a question for the officer, but
Okay.
But you've
Perhaps
got a long
you can pass it
record,
on to
so-
the Minister, Arthur. Thank you.
Just one last one from me. Isn't it odd that you model a renewable scenario but not any other, especially given the government lacks any policy to support renewable investment post-2020?
Well, Senator, there's been a range of modelling that's been done on this question, and probably the most recently released modelling on that issue would have been by the Climate Change Authority. That will be an input to the 2017 review. The Energy Council is doing work. The Chief Scientist Review of the Blueprint of the Electricity System is doing work on this issue. So certainly that work is happening, but it's an ongoing process.
Sorry, so the renewable energy target is to 2030, Senator. So it's not just a 20. It doesn't finish at 2020. The increase finishes at 2020.
For 10 years.
But it's paid out for over the succeeding decade. It is a 2030 policy as well.
Okay, well, we'll have a chance to discuss some of that a little bit more detail now, because we are going to call program 2.0